James, giving us some hints about how to be in silence from a Zen perspective. So James, you can go ahead and give us some just a
Certainly. Should I repeat what I said?
please repeat because I made a mistake today and I muted you. That's entirely too much too much shunyata.
Right. That's the old. I can remember when I first began studying, and you get the young Dharma people, just back from Thailand or Japan or whatever, and they'd all like to tell the story of the master who comes out to give a lecture on Buddhist meditation, Buddhism, and just stands there silently for a few minutes and then walks off the stage. And how they inevitably all say, this is what I should do, but then none of them ever did do that. Apparently, we just got it. Uh, Zen meditation is a practice of presence. It really is fundamentally sit down, shut up, pay attention. There isn't a lot more instruction than that, because the mind is such a monkey and we don't actually pay attention. Many people counsel some breath counting at the beginning. There are many ways to do that. Inhale, count one, exhale, count two, inhale, count three, and so on up to 10, and start over again as common as you get. But I would suggest if you don't actually have a practice for our 15 minutes here, you might try something that comes out of the Rinzai tradition. They do a lot of breath work in addition to the the practice of presence, and of those, the simplest that might be edifying is to breathe normally. Try to be aware, just be present. We normally sit with our eyes open in Zen. We like to see where we're going. And um, as you breathe, as you come to the exhalation, do it naturally. But then when you come to the end, just push it a little bit. So you inhale, you exhale, and then let it go, and then repeat and see what pops up.
Okay, thank you. So, um, James is going to share some of his wisdom gathered over many decades of learning and teaching. And James, before you begin, I'd like to just say a few words about you to the group. And here goes. Some of you may know that James is an American Zen Buddhist priest and a retired Unitarian Universalist minister. James and I met about 22 years ago, approximately, when the Empty Bell was flourishing in Watertown. At that time, James was the new minister at the First Unitarian Society in Newton. You emailed me, recognizing our common interest in interspiritual wisdom, especially Buddhist-Christian dialogue. And we met 2 months later, after enjoying each other's company, when you invited me to your community to play shakuhachi at a Buddhist wedding. And I don't know if you remember, but I made a note of this. It was the wedding of Doug and Katya Bates. That may be a long time ago now. I don't know. Your bio is quite amazing. It's one of the advantages of growing older. James and I are about the same age. His spiritual journey includes so many amazing stopping places, and I've been looking at James's bio in different places. You began your Zen journey in the late 60s at the Berkeley Zen Center. You were ordained and soon received Dharma transmission from, is it Jiyu Kennett Roshi? Roshi at Shasta Abbey.
Right, Jiyu.
Jiyu, yeah. The beautiful Shasta Abbey in Northern California. Along the way, you've explored Zen resonances with other contemplative traditions, including Episcopal Christianity, Gnosticism, Sufism, and after decades of direct experience with silence and Koan study, some of us may not be familiar with Koan study. You've integrated theological studies also at the Pacific School of Religion, so you've got an MDiv, Master of Divinity from there, and a Master of Philosophy. So now, this is just the last I'll share. There's so much I could say about James. It's lovely just to have you here. James is past president of the Unitarian Universalist Buddhist Fellowship. He was the first Unitarian Universalist minister in America to be named a Zen Master. Your website I will share after we meet today. I'll send it out. And your middle name is Ishmael, James Ishmael Ford. Where'd you get the Ishmael? Was that from your parent?
No, I call it a nam de cult. A Sufi sheikh gave it to me. It means either he who hears God or he who God hears. I'll take it either way. And it just sort of, it became part of the moniker.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Ishmael. So your website is jamesishmaelford.com. And I was looking at it today, and you also have a blog called Monkey Mind, something we're all familiar with, Monkey Mind. So that might be a good blog for us to check out. And that's at a website called Pathos.
Right. If you Google Monkey Mind and James Ford, it'll pop up. I started it many years ago. I had my one and only sabbatical as a parish minister, and somebody said, "Keep in touch with the people who are paying the bills. You might start a blog." And in those days there was very simple programs you could do, and I forget what it is. It's 17 years I think now,
Yeah.
and somehow it just keeps going.
Well, it takes incredible dedication to keep it going, I know. So it doesn't just happen on its own, right? Yeah. But you also have a Facebook page, which is fascinating, and you're keeping up with it on non-dual Christianity.
Yeah, it's a little, it's a like much of Facebook, it's a great idea. I keep hoping there'll be sort of an interesting conversation. So far, people mainly just post things they think is interesting, and there's not a lot of conversation that generates. But if
Yeah.
you're interested in the subject, join it. Especially if you have thoughts to share on the subject.
Yeah. And many of us do follow the contemplative non-dual practice in Christianity. So I think some of us will be there. And this is the last thing I want to share. And that is that you co-founded the Boundless Way Zendo in Worcester, Massachusetts. And David Reineck is the abbot now. And David must have been a student of yours.
David was actually authorized as a Zen teacher in a Korean lineage, but we worked together, and he did do the formal Koan curriculum that I teach with me as well, and so he has an authorization from me, but he was a teacher before that, and uh, uh,
Yeah.
we remain, despite all that, we're still friends.
Yeah. He's a great person and a friend too. And he's been to the Empty Bell here pre-pandemic when he was able to be here in a physical way. And he will come and join us here at the Empty Bell on Zoom on Wednesday morning, April 20th. So we'll get another good hit of Zen this spring. So that's all I wanted. Yeah, that's all I wanted to share. So please, it's all yours. We're yours.
Well, thank you. So we were talking about what might be a nice, useful something to share here, and Jonas did point out, we are in the midst of war and rumors of war, and I think probably the only thing worse than watching a war happen is being caught up in it, but it's watching it is not a happy thing, and where do we go? What does this mean for those of us caught up in contemplative traditions, especially those of us who are pacifistically inclined? And I didn't have remarks directly on that subject that I felt happy to address. I've spoken on nonviolence a number of times in the past, and I've never felt it worked. But there is this thing about engagement, and how is it that we're in this world, on a path that is, kind of parallel to or perpendicular even to what it is that people normally are. So I've written a lot of books, and I'm working on one right now that's a consideration of the arc of the spiritual life. And as I explore it, I realize, well, there has to be, there's also, well, what about the social engagement component? What about the fact that the world is messy? And where do we fit into that? I have a chapter on that, and I thought I would share most of what I had in the first draft. So you're all my guinea pigs for whether this is even coherent. But when I was a parish minister, I recall how once I was late and driving into the church. I paused and was everything was late, and I had a chance to listen to an NPR broadcast of a BBC news program. They were discussing poverty in America. The story led with some of those sound bites that we hear from people mocking what we call poverty in this country, pointing out how the majority of our poor have televisions and refrigerators. The talking heads often add piously how most of America's poor never go to bed without missing a meal. This NPR story, however, just started there. They went on from those comments to an interview with some children at a school in Nevada. They were homeless, an increasing part of our American population. Several of the children spoke of going to bed without eating. They struggled for words to describe their experience. My tummy growled. Another saying how hard it was to sleep. I waited until the next morning when I could go to school and eat. Another child waited. and then spoke very softly. It was hard to understand, and the interviewer had to ask for sure what the child said. It was, "We ate a rat." I've never forgotten that. Of course, these are just anecdotes of limited statistical significance. Here we are now, helplessly watching Russia invade Ukraine, and our own talking heads doing their things. I was at my mother-in-law's house the last night, actually, and she accidentally turned on, while we were there for a few moments, Tucker Carlson, who was explaining, how Mr. Putin was totally within his rights, and we're involved because we have some dark purpose to overthrow the American Republic. A couple of years ago, I was invited to talk about my experiences as a longtime Zen practitioner at a survey of Buddhism class at the University of Southern California. It was fun. And as often happens in my experience, the best parts came when the students were invited to ask me questions. And one question turned on politics. War, hunger, racism, sexism. Can Buddhists be socially engaged? And should Buddhists be socially engaged? And here I would say Christians, Muslims, Jews, anybody involved in a contemplative life. Can we be socially engaged? Fair questions. It is a question for anyone walking a spiritual path. And it's part of the questions of what a mature spiritual life needs to look like. In that moment, I shared how I believe in the face of human suffering. How can we not respond? Later that day, I mentioned this experience on one of my social media platforms, and pretty close to immediately, I found a flood of comments, one which I believe represents what a lot of people interested in Buddhism and non-duality and contemplation feel. The writer lamented the fact that Buddhist involvement in politics in the West quickly was clear he meant Buddhist involvement in left-leaning politics. He summarized it as, quote, the disease of social justice. I was caught with that. Disease, dis-ease. For me, it's very important to try and not turn away too quickly. Hallmark of my spiritual practice. It works for my inner life. So why shouldn't it also be applied to my social life? This said, I have a visceral anxiety about our contemporary convert Buddhist involvement in politics. The fact that nearly all of us who choose to write or speak on the subject fall to the left of the American political scene is a red flag. I'm mindful of how the Zen churches in Japan all fell into line with the Imperial Japanese War rhetoric at the run-up to the Second World War, and how people who are very important in my own spiritual lineages said things I find reprehensible. The example I most think of are various anti-Semitic statements by Japanese priests and Japan, which also, as most of those writers and speakers had no actual experience of Jews, were in fact using them as a term of art to capture bourgeois democracy. So, endless calls to caution. Another hesitation that's built into my spiritual practice is don't believe everything you think. The writer who objected to what at the time was my very mild call to social awareness offered another point that I think cannot be ignored. He offered two quotes, one attributed to the Buddha as among his final words, "With diligence, seek out your own enlightenment." The other from the lineage source of the Zen schools, the ancestor Huineng, quote, "A true cultivator of the way does not see the trespasses of the world." He, my unsolicited commentator, concluded with, it felt some snark, making it easy to not attend to the deeper point. That trap lies open for all of us. I find it inescapable that he points to something at the heart of Buddhism, and I would suggest you can find it in Christianity, Judaism, and again, any inward turning path, which is that right at the heart of the Buddha's analysis was a rejection of the world. The original Buddhist Sangha was a band first of monks and then of monks and nuns who had turned their hearts from the world and toward their own personal liberation. It seems inescapable. It is a thread in our history and a part of our makeup. Yes, community quickly expanded to be a fourfold one of monks and nuns, laymen and laywomen. But the layperson, while throughout Buddhism's history are thrown an occasional bone, where it is acknowledged almost always reluctantly that even a layperson can achieve liberation, for the most part their task is to support the monastic community and to reap the benefit of that merit in a future life. Otherwise, the world is saha, something to be endured until it can be escaped. And my correspondent's point, the real point, was that this world of tears cannot be fixed. And with that, the whole project of Buddhism is being perverted by our contemporary and largely convert focus on social engagement. The real deal is escape. Here I find my heart turning back to that gathering of students at USC and their questions. They asked a number about social concerns and what Buddhism in the West might have to say about this. Here I found myself thinking of what has been emerging. A mixed bag, no doubt, some of it silly, some of it possibly dangerous in unwholesome ways, and a whole lot of it a great intuitive turning toward the suffering of the world as the very work of the heart. With that, what is our liberation, if it is no place other than this wildly open world? How do we engage in a way that is more helpful and less harmful? As it turns out, there are any number of hints for us within the Buddhist traditions. One of my favorite resources for Nikaya Buddhism, the Buddhism that is most closely aligned with the Pali text, is Rapola's What the Buddha Taught. It was published back in 1959, and its simplicity, its clarity, its generosity of heart has kept it in print and read to this day. It's also been criticized as an example of the emerging modernist Buddhism, of which Western Buddhism is a subset. That caveat included, the Venerable Wapola offered a fascinating analysis. He pointed out that the Buddha of history, while absolutely focused on ethics, spirituality, and philosophy, over 40 years, he also spoke on society, economics, and politics. Among the Venerable's citations, he goes to the Digha Nikaya, number 26, if you are taking notes, with an illustration of his concern. In that text, the Buddha specifically addressed poverty. He says that's the cause of theft, falsehood, violence, hatred, and cruelty. Elsewhere, the Buddha rejects punishment as the way of solving social ills, saying the fix is to address poverty, and that society, through its governments, needs to be involved in ways to mitigate the suffering of people. So there is ample precedent for social engagement and even something of a moral compass in the Nikaya literature. More important to me is the implicit call of the two truths. The world is vast and empty, and the world of history and phenomena are not two. As I've come to understand them, we arise within the world through causal conditions. Our choices, our actions create circumstances for others as well as ourselves. We're all of us caught up again to draw upon another source with an indivisible garment of destiny. And to ground it all, that emptiness of all things is also true, as fully true as the play of cause and effect. Also, it joins us into a single family of things. It's been my experience as I've come to taste the realities of the consequences of my behaviors and the fact that it is all from before time empty, raises in my heart a sense of care, of compassion for others, of what we in the West call love. And because of this, I find a need to redouble my efforts to be of truth to others as much as for myself. So, the fundamental to the mature spiritual path as I've seen it. With that, how do we engage? I've seen excesses among my friends, cruelties expressed in the name of generosity. I'm painfully conscious of the fact that I cannot know enough, that my decisions and actions are always going to be based upon incomplete knowledge, which at the same time does not excuse engagement with questions of poverty and wealth, of war and peace, with questions of racism, with questions of isolation and pain. How do we engage? It needs to be a new kind of engagement, I believe, something open-handed, something generous. And I think the Venerable Wapola also pointed some helpful directions. He cited the Jataka tales, those popular legends of the Buddha's lives before he became the Buddha. They're great for kids' stories, and they're good for adults too. In there, we find 10 attributes of kings, which we can read as 10 attributes of government. And they might even be healthful pointers for genuine engagement. So they're just to quickly run through them: charity, morality, altruism, honesty, gentleness, self-restraining, non-anger, non-violence, forbearance, and last, uprightness. I think we can kind of see these in expansive ways. So, number one, we need to start with generosity of heart. Two, we need to bind ourselves to standards of conduct that support our aspirations. Another friend of mine out your way, James Cordova, a Zen teacher, says the precepts, which are the form of ethical content in Zen Buddhism and Buddhism, the precepts take the form they take because we take the form we take. Rubber and road, one thing. That is, there's a matching of these precepts in our lives, which engaged in a lively and caring manner contain and liberate. We need to recall this is not about ourselves, myself. It's never just about ourselves. We need to commit to a relentless honesty, especially about our own thoughts and actions. We need to try for gentleness, aimed both at ourselves and others. We need to recall we are never actually in charge, and it would behoove us to act like that was true. There are some very important criticisms of the Buddhist call to avoid anger, pointing out that how anger can be the only appropriate response to some circumstances. There is nonetheless a legitimate warning about a clinging anger, what I would call hatred, which has a napalm effect on the heart. As with all those precepts, we need to hold them as all other created things lightly, knowing there is a time to hold and a time to let go. But that does include a time of holding. The Buddha way is one of nonviolence, and that's an echo for us as we look at this war. And it's a harsh truth. Immediately connected to nonviolence is cultivating a sense of patience, even as there is urgency. There are injustices right now, and people are not in a position to wait, and all things come to fruition in their own time. So finding the harmonies and acting within the realities is critical. And last in that list of expansive reflections, the primary principle of the practice has to be not knowing. There is a great caution in this. We do not know how our actions will turn out. There are simply too many moving parts. At the same time, we're not excused from acting. We must. So, how do we engage war? How do we engage witnessing a war? How do we engage injustices of all sorts? And I think of that child and that rat. What is the right action for us? Well, here's the truth. It's going to be one continuous mistake. That's just how it is. And I know how true this is for me. I don't have enough fingers or toes to count my mistakes, blunders, self-serving misstatements, and actions. However, if our actions are guided by non-dual insight, the Buddha's broad guidance, Jesus' grace, maybe those 10 principles, then I believe we have a lot better chance of doing good than ill. There is no way to absent ourselves. Everything we choose to do or not do will have consequences. However, skillful or not, engagement in this world is part of the true heart of a spiritual way. The intimate way is about discovering our connections. It is a path of personal healing. It is about delivering ourselves from the great hurt. And it comes with consequences. It's seeing into how profoundly we are connected. One metaphor I like to use is that we're one family. Actually, our connections are even deeper, but family, that's good enough. Plenty good enough. From that place, I suggest we'll know what to do, and that we should do something. No kid should have to eat a rat. Not in our family. And who can be excluded from the family? What we find as a simple but harsh truth is that as we open into the great way, we find we are all of us in this together. How we meet is going to be unique to each of us, but meeting, this place, our engagement, central part of our way, the intimate way. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, James. Thank you. Well, I just traveled in an intimate way across many paths across the world, and many paths in my heart. You touched on some conundrums, questions, like koans, no escape. This is one of the things, I learned really from Zen, that there is no escape. This moment is the focus. How am I living this moment? Am I meeting this moment? And I certainly feel this moment in being with you again. And so I'd like to ask others now, if it's okay with you, James, to yeah, James is here, available for us for the next maybe almost 30 minutes before he needs to go on. So what comes up for you in listening to James? Any questions or observations? Yeah, Meg.
Hi, I'm Meg. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about what you mean by no escape.
Sure. Actually, Jonas raised that particular phrase, but I can play with it. Uh, um, often, the practice of presence. We talk about being present. We talk about being in the moment. We talk about uh, um, um, it all being revealed here. Uh, there's there's an experience that can be felt as a shadow there. We can't escape this moment either. We there, Jesus, please, what is it? Deliver me from this place if you can, if you will. There are nasty places to be that are all this moment, as well as the joyful and beautiful and the chocolate cake moments. How do we surrender into the intimate moment, as it really is, it being experienced? Kind of the nature of the practice, because there's part of us that just wants to not be here, or we be here now once in a while, and so I think that's that there's a wonderful Tibetan nun, Pema Chodron, who specializes in writing about rough times and how to meet them, and one of her books is called The Wisdom of No Escape. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that was helpful, but yeah.
Margaret.
I want to say that I laughed out loud when you said it's something like it's all going to be one continuous mistake. I love that. I love just acknowledging that. So you're speaking of the necessity, as I hear you, of social engagement. I would say even the urgency of social engagement, and yet the impossibility of knowing how to get it right. So the humility with which we must act and keep amending, and it reminded me of the image I heard years ago of an airplane making a continental flight from, like, say, New York to Los Angeles. Apparently is off course something like 90% of the time, which means it's constantly correcting course. So I'm imagining, we have to be that sensitive, like, okay, I've kind of I'm not, no, come back this way. And just knowing that I'm going to get it wrong and that's okay. So I appreciate the freedom of your offering that.
Well, thank you. The term is a lift. In the West, we have come up with a quote from Eihei Dogen: "The spiritual practice in life is one continuous mistake." It's really interesting because, well, first off, Eihei Dogen was this 12th century Japanese spiritual teacher, theologian. Kind of, he's not a systematic thinker, but he occupies a place not unlike Thomas Aquinas. Massive intellect, deep spirituality, and touches on many aspects of the spiritual life. He doesn't appear to have ever said life Zen is one continuous mistake, but he said it all the time. He constantly called us back to the great mess. The other way I find tagging into that is a primary practice in the Zen way is not knowing, and not knowing has a whole boatload of shades. There is indeed a deep not knowing, which is just simply turning towards the wonder, the mystery, what Christians might call God. But there are other shades of not knowing. They're just plain what? I'm clueless. But there's also knowledge. Knowing is always imperfect. It's through a glass darkly, without a until later. It's always through a glass darkly, and so that plays out in our lives. My life is one continuous mistake to coming back to not knowing. Boatload of forgiveness is needed, aimed at myself as well as others, and remembering we're trapped in the moment. We should give ourselves, a little bit of support and love, and a great deal of not knowing, and a constant. And I love your image, Margaret, the airplane image. I've never heard that before, but I love 90% off course. That sounds about right to me. And it's interesting that the 10% goddess gets us there. So thank you.
Wonderful. What else comes up for you?
And we can go in other directions. It doesn't. The war is there, and justice is an issue to talk about. But we're also, I think, there is this other aspect to this. Speaking of airplanes, I've always thought the advice: put the mask on yourself, and then put the mask on your companion. I think a great deal of what we're doing as a spiritual practice is preparing us. It's putting the mask on. It's finding the oxygen. And maybe that's, and that is the gathering here, is the practices of the heart. If you want to talk about those a little bit, that is endlessly fascinating to me, or maybe something else. The things I don't know about but are willing to talk about are enormous.
Jonathan?
was taken in by Margaret's navigational Margaret's navigational reference, and I'm thinking of the experience I have of steering a boat in a seaway. There is no possibility of a straight course because there are the waves. And so in order to go straight, we have to veer across the shape of the waves. And so I want to say that just to add a thought that navigational vector change, which is eventually corrected, actually it does naturally correct. But in the process of being improperly directed, we see something new. We see something different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm just touched by the way that your comments kind of, in a wonderfully tangled and textured way, just kind of infiltrate my mind and make me think of things that are helpful.
I guarantee you that your ship analogy will be in a forthcoming talk of mine.
I'll have to take you sailing then.
That opens a whole different thing. I have over my life had several friends who are like fanatical sailors, and I have been dragooned onto their boats on occasion, and I don't get it. It's like sitting out in the sun being hot, or sitting out in the sun being cold and wet. And I'm willing to do those things, but I don't generally like to volunteer.
I was only add something. Margaret's father was a sailor, and we were out on the North Shore somewhere, and he gave me the wheel, and he and Margaret sat in the back of the boat. This would be in the early 1980s, and I had never steered a boat, especially a large sailboat. And so Margaret and John Bullitt were in the back, talking poetry to each other, reciting poetry to the other, and I was left alone at the wheel in pretty high seas. And one of the things I learned is that when you're sailing, it's very zen-y, because you have to stay open to everything 360 degrees, because the wind changes, the waves change, the height of the waves changes, the wheel feels differently, the rudder moves. The compass is in front of you, and the compass is saying something different now than it said a minute ago. You have to stay awake. And it just felt to me like a great metaphor for living, because things are happening all around us all the time. But there tends to be this vectored awareness where we're just looking at what we are doing right now and what we're thinking about. And so anyway, it's a wonderful and scary experience.
I like that. I like that a lot. It's like my friends trying to convince me that baseball's not boring, by explaining all the spiritual components to it. Thank you.
I'll just jump in with one more analogy. In horseback riding, you want to keep looking where you want to be going, but you don't want to be like fixed. You're supposed to keep what they call soft eyes. So you're seeing where you're going, but you're also open to what's happening in your line of sight in a more open way. So I find that also a really helpful metaphor.
And that is Zen meditation. That's really super cool.
Soft eyes.
Thank you. Soft eyes. Yeah. With those open eyes too.
Mm-hmm. How about, yes, Mindy?
Margaret, is that also how you're communicating with the horse? That if you got rigid, the relationship with the horse wouldn't be agile?
Oh yeah, there's nothing like horseback riding where you get the contrast between I'm totally separate from you and I'm just bouncing around on top of you versus we're resonating with, where we're communicating, we're in union with each other in some way. Yeah, it's great. That's a meditation.
Well, that really is. Yeah.
James, I was thinking about what you said about when that student arose with that thought about how you do involvement versus distance and how you both do your own journey and get involved in the world. And then you said something else about some people do their spiritual practice by going inside, by being, going to the quieter place or the unified place. And I'm just interested about conflicts and how when people have very different ideas of moving forward, how you can apply the sense of not knowing when somebody's really sure they know, how that works.
Well, I think this is critical. This is why I'm a little anxious about my own politics because I move in a bubble. People with I associate with people who agree with me, and I swear it sure looks right. Um, but when everybody agrees, there's something wrong. I think that just seems to be a principle of life, and so for me it means humility. Still have to act, still have to do by the best lights. I think there are certain principles that can hold me in my actions, and first and foremost of those is that we're radically interdependent and that we are all, that there is no genuine autonomy. It's all conditional, and um, um, any decisions I make, any actions I take, have to be informed by that, and even then, it may turn out badly. I think that's the other part of it is that we all die. You know, we are mortal creatures, and there may be part of us that's not, but that's a larger conversation. Uh, but what you do know for sure is that we will end, and as all things do, and how do we act within that frame? There are more important things than dying, I think. But not very many. But what are they, and how do they inform what I do? And for me, it's always coming back to not knowing. The worst things I've ever done is when I'm absolutely certain. Uh, um, 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 the path is, a constant call to humility. Um, One continuous mistake I hear.
Thank you.
So on a practical level, how did you respond when your mother-in-law was playing Tucker Carlson?
That was an interesting thing because she I don't think she meant to, because we have an unspoken agreement that she doesn't play her right-wing hate stuff while we're present, and um, I ran some very unpleasant thoughts through my head, and part of we live we live here in Southern California because we're native Californians, but we're here because of her. When we retired, Jan wanted to be within helping distance of her mom, and I watched when her father died, and we were a continent apart, and how that really tore at her. And we're here. She's 94. She lives on her own. She in her own home. Drives to the grocery store and to church, where she gets another good dollop of hate, and uh, uh, um, I I thought bad thoughts and I said nothing, and it ended in 5 minutes. Yeah.
James, thank you for sharing that personal story. I think we all have interesting relatives. You You're reminding me, as I watch my awareness throughout the day, of those times when I can see judgment, feel judgment come up, or reactivity. And how reactivity feels to me is that life is flowing freely, easily, and when reactivity comes up, it's like bam, there's a stop sign. And I know when that stop sign comes up that something's going on, that there's that has to be looked at, investigated.
Well, there's that famous cartoon about the guru and the chela. The guru says, you have accomplished all that I have to teach, but before I make you a teacher, you can go home for Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Yeah. Then we'll really find out the truth. Yeah.
Oh, back to square one. Yeah. There's a dear friend of mine, Dosho Port, great Zen teacher, kind of a jerk. He has, I forget what it is. There's like 6 steps to awakening or 7 steps to awakening. I forget what it is. But it's great. And it's all these kind of like markers of the interior life. And he really is very insightful. And then he comes to the last one, the culmination is, and then you fall into a well. Uh, uh, it's become the great marker of my own. I'm collecting how many times I fall into the well.
You reminded me of Choyam Trungpa's saying. You probably know it. We've talked about it here before. Of the bad news is that we're falling, and the good news is that there's no bottom.
Yeah. For a real monster, he really was smart. He said a lot of really good things.
Yeah.
And another lesson for us, there's somebody who could be so massively, um, um, screwed up, could be so wise, super call to humility. Yeah.
Yeah. How about others? There's a lot. I know there's a lot of deep listening going on here. Is anyone who hasn't spoken have a question for James or observation? Hyatt.
Thank you for coming to be with us. I think a lot about self-compassion, and since you've talked about how many continual mistakes are involved in your path, could you talk about how self-compassion works in your practice?
Yes, very much. Uh, um, um, I'm called to see people in their vulnerability and as unique and precious in their moment, and I'm not an exception. Now, I have seen people, it's a dangerous, every authentic thing is dangerous. And so the issue I've seen often with self-compassion is that it becomes narcissism. And that serves nobody any good. But we're also all wounded, and we do need to be compassionate to ourselves. How do we treat ourselves as no worse than nor any better than anybody else? And back to the one continuous mistake. But some of us are more willing to cut slack for ourselves, and others among us are more willing to beat ourselves up. And both of those need correction. And in myself, I think it's just a constantly, well, that was a real whiz bang of a stupid move, and try to correct it as much as I can, and pick myself up and dust myself off and start over again. Climb out of that stupid well, even if I know it really well. Is that helpful? I'm sorry. I've noticed. I've still, even what is it? We've all been living on Zoom pretty much exclusively for the last 2 years. I still look at the person on the screen rather than at the little camera. And someday I will have the illusion of eye contact on screen. Probably just about when we stop using them.
Mhm. Well, I think being with others' faces in this special way has really taught me a lot about how the soul is visible in the face. And that's why I'm generally not friendly, and I have some reactivity if people are eating while we're talking here on Zoom. Like just being really here through the face is a beautiful thing. Even if we're not feeling well, I mean, it's not like the soul is always on the good side, or the pleasant side or the joyful side. And BJ, sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Fine. It's wonderful to see you, James. I have a question about how, when the practice helps, sort of allows us to let go of our concept of self and sort of deepens our awareness of just being alive in a different way. How does that change the relationship to social engagement?
I think it's critical to a healthy social engagement, because often I have observed in my friends and myself on occasion that social engagement is can be simply an ideological perspective. There's a lot of shoulds in there, and and sometimes I think the analysis is good. Sometimes I'm not so sure the analysis is that good. Um, but but the actions matter when I realize the bottom line is radical interdependence, that we really are interbeing. As Thich Nhat Hanh said, um, um, and the correction for me is when I notice the fact that that I am neither worse than nor better than another, and then a kitty for whom a rat is breakfast is uh, um, a call to me to try and do something, what I can, and um, I'm actually on Sunday. It turns out Monday, this coming Monday, is Albert Einstein's birthday. And so on Sunday, I'm preaching at the Los Angeles Unitarian Church, and I've been looking at the the yeah, he's said a lot of non-dual things, or actually he said a lot of pantheistic things, and but there's this one he wrote there was somebody, fascinating fellow who had been like a rabbi a chaplain in the Second World War. He was one of the first chaplains into Buchenwald. His It turned out that the if you were a child or a youth, you were at the front of the line to be gassed, and somehow at the end of the war, the inmates had hidden 900 children and youth throughout the entire constant things, and this chaplain rabbi was the one put in charge of taking care of them, and he managed to get them all off to into France, and then off to the various places. Elie Wiesel, Jan says my pronunciation's atrocious, was one of the kids. So, but while he was there in France, all three of his children got polio, and one of them died. And he wrote Albert Einstein for whatever reason, and Einstein wrote a 3-sentence note back. He just said, that we are radically interconnected. I'm paraphrasing. He said we need to free ourselves from the illusion of our separateness, and when we do, we find a measure of peace. And I thought, that's a non-dual statement, the not two thing. And Yeah, I've been just brooding over it for ever since I read about this thing, and I think it's there.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Elie Wiesel, right?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's what my wife said.
Yeah.
I think Meg was going to say something.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to put it on the chat. What does non-dual actually mean?
You know, uh, uh,
An example.
right. I'm glad you asked.
Everybody
A
else knows, but I don't.
Well,
Yeah.
excuse me. Let me just mention that, Meg, I can barely hear you, so you might be too far away from your microphone. But your question is, what does non-dual actually mean?
Right, and it's fascinating because I'm reading. I think it's Entry into the Inconceivable. I need to look it up, but Ellen Burks, who is a Christian Zen teacher, Dharma successor to Robert Kennedy, the Jesuit Zen master. Um, she's her most recent book. It's an Orbis Press title, and it's on Zen and Christian practices, the thing. And she said, so what is non-dual? She said, before I was a nurse, before I was a professor of nursing, before I was a Zen teacher, I was a first grade teacher. I can explain this. She said, non-dual means not two. And then part of the reason we say non-dual rather than one, however, is that there is a phenomenal world. You're there, I'm here. Those are not illusions. Those are actual things going on. But in addition to the realm of the phenomenal world, there is a sense in which everything is a true sense in which everything is actually connected. One, in Zen, empty. In Christianity, perhaps divine, holy anyway, and so it becomes what in Buddhism we call the two truths. It's there is the phenomenal world. Here we are, all these screens, um, and it's all luminously empty, brightly empty. The other, and Christianity approaches it a little differently. Islam approaches it a little differently. Judaism approaches it a little differently, and each Hinduism. We all have this intuition that it's not that we're unified, but it's alive. It's dynamic. And the one phrase we all share is non-dual. Well, we say it's not two. But another way of saying that is not two, it's not one. So I wasn't a first grade teacher, so I had to get complicated. Yeah.
Well, in the Christian tradition, I just finished my book on the Holy Trinity, My Dear Far Nearness, which is a name from Marguerite Porete in the 14th century. And of course, we have this basic intuition of ultimate reality is not one, not three, and one and three. So what is that all about? And I can't help but say, if you're interested, it'll be out on March 1st. I mean, May 1st. But yeah, this is in all the traditions, though. It's not just Buddhist or Christian. This perception of the interconnectedness is dynamic, and we can look at it from a phenomenal way, as you say. And I'm not you. You're over there in California. I'm over here in Western Massachusetts. Definitely not. On the other hand, I have this intuitive sense of your presence in me, that I'm taking you in, and that's not, I would call that non-dual. That I'm you, but I'm not you. So it works in relationships too, especially if I'm judgmental about somebody. The first the first movement in judgment is separation. Wow, you're just so strange that you're acting that way. That's the first movement. But then to let that revolve into, oh, I see how I'm like you. I do that too, actually, if I'm honest to myself. So to separate from you is a way to separate from the parts of myself that I don't like. So that's the non-dual dance in a sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just to cap that, in the Zen tradition, the phrase is, "You are not it, but in truth, it is you."
Mhm.
So all these things, they're elusive and they're inviting. They're not meant to be, mathematical formulas, but um, descriptions of the heart and invitations for us to fall into a path
Yeah.
towards.
Lori.
I'm going to change the subject, but James, I wonder if there's anything that gives you hope these days.
Well, well, we all die. Uh, planets die, stars die. We're in a pretty bad moment. I wouldn't put too much money on the species surviving, um, um, and it's okay. There is, I mean, in all this dreadfulness, at the same time, there is a peace that passes all understanding, and there is some glorious unity, and even if this little experiment on this little planet, doesn't make it, it's okay. Um, it's all, meaning and meaninglessness, at some point burn away, into the great presence. And I put my comfort there, I put my hope there, Um, and I figure I got to work a little bit here to try, and it would be nice if I think, we monkeys are, we're entertaining at least, and, and some of us are sweet.
Yes. I think you're sweet, James. It's getting to be that time when we need to say, I feel bad about saying this, but to say so long and let James go on to his lovely ocean villa.
We're a little condo 4 blocks from the water. Good karma from a previous lifetime. I didn't earn this, that's for sure.
Yes,
Uh,
right.
uh, but I do have. We have our own evening meeting for our sangha as well.
Oh,
If for meaningless advertising, if you're up at 10 p.m. on Thursday, which is 7 out here, I'll be actually giving a lecture on the history of Zen Buddhism at the First Unitarian Church of Los Angeles. If you just Google First Unitarian, if you stay up that late, Google First Unitarian Church of Los Angeles, and they take you right to the link. 7 p.m.
they might record that too if we do miss it. You think?
They will. They do record it, and it eventually ends up somewhere on the church's website.
That's great.
I,
Well, I just want to say, no, go ahead, James. It's so wonderful to see you again and to share yourself with us. Thank you so much. And why don't we unmute, everyone unmute to say so long to each other and to James, and move into our evening together.
I hope you come back to Massachusetts, James, and join us at the Empty Sky.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really
Thank you, Jay.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, friends.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Good night, everyone.
And thank you, Jonas.
Good night.
Jonas.
You're welcome. Thank you. God bless. God bless you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, James. See you.